Hey, Dave here on Zilog and Moto, and tonight we're shooting late on a Tuesday. Had an appointment with an NBA game earlier, and this was the only time I could really work this in. Unfortunately, tonight's game is not a basketball game, because that'd be a nice tie-in. But it's not. Having said all that, on the last episode I alluded to the fact that I would be sort of breaking one of my own rules today. Although I think it's somewhat debatable whether I am or not. I already mentioned the dilemma that I have, in that there are a lot of sports titles for these consoles. And then I was going to try to bounce around between genres and to try to make it a little bit more interesting for you, the viewer. Well, last episode was for RBI Baseball 3, and this episode is for PGA Tour Golf. So yes, I know, 2 sports titles in a row, but I'm going to argue that even though they're both sports titles, because they're concerning 2 different sports, it's okay. And maybe not. Too late now. And rules are meant to be broken, unless you're doing in a car doing 20 miles over the speed limit, and the cops are practicing for St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, that happened. Oops. Obey the speed limit, kids. Anyway, let's get to the game and see what Electronics Arts has for us today. Okay, now here is PGA Tour Golf. And the first thing you should notice is that here, unlike most other first-gen Electronic Arts games, this one comes in a fairly standard clamshell case. No hang tab though, and not even where one would have been removed. It's just simply a plain clamshell case. Obviously it's not just like a standard Genesis case, because the actual cartridge still features the taller yellow tab layout, requiring a different height cartridge repository. But other than that, if you were to see this on the shelf with other Genesis games, you wouldn't think anything strange about it. I mention that just because I'm not currently aware of any other early EA Genesis titles like that, because they were either in custom cardboard boxes or wide clamshell cases. It'll be interesting as I go through these reviews to see if I find any other titles like this. On the inside, the manual's in pretty good shape, along with a green warranty card, if I can get it out, to match the rest of the box and the artwork. The manual's pretty detailed and thick. Like Bill Walsh College Football, if you skip to the middle of the manual, so in the beginning here you got all the actual gameplay stuff. If you go to the middle, or just past the middle, I should say. See here, this section here that starts about PGA Tour Golf Guide. A brief history of the PGA Tour. Anyway, you get to a section that explains what the PGA is, what TPC is, somewhere in here, and biographies of 10 of the golfers featured in the game that give advice on the hole flyovers. Went too far. And as you get to the end here, it talks about what the TPC is. It's interesting to say the least, but just strange to look at in 2019 when almost no games come with manuals. Much less manuals with a bunch of superfluous information that doesn't even really have anything to do with playing the game. And don't get me wrong, I love manuals, I love all this stuff that comes with these games as part of why I do the collecting. It's just weird to see, like, the manual just being filled out with, I don't want to say random information, but just information the player doesn't need to know to play the game. As soon as we get past the title screen, you'll immediately notice the main menu functions like a Windows interface, with a bar going across the top of the screen with headings for submenus that you can click on by using the C button on the controller. It's actually pretty startling. I've played lots of games on this platform, but I don't ever remember a game presenting itself quite like this. But I must say, it works. Everything is clearly laid out, and the selections are auto-highlighted, so using the D-pad and the C button replicates a mouse or keyboard just fine. For those of you that don't know, Electronic Arts had been a computer game developer going back to the early 80s, producing games for all sorts of varieties of home computers. For instance, I remember playing a game for the Commodore 64 called Pinball Construction Set that had a copyright date of 1983 and the EA name and logo, and sure enough, I would later find out that it was the same company. John Madden Football and PGA Tour Golf came about in the same way, debuting first on the PC before being brought over to the Sega Genesis. Apparently EA thought the best way to port the game to the Genesis was to keep the PC-style menu intact, and as I said, it works great, but man, it's a bit startling at first. On to the game itself. One of the absolute best features of the game, and one that I raved about on the Phantasy Star review, is the inclusion of a battery backup, which is proudly mentioned on the cover of the game. It might seem like a silly thing, but it makes what normally might be a headache-inducing password system a very smooth and enjoyable experience, just like as if you were playing on PC. Actually, possibly better, because the actual process of saving your game or settings or scores is nearly instantaneous, versus what might have been a few second wait time on a computer as the settings were being saved to a disk or hard drive. To explain a little bit more about what this allows you to do, let's go through what the battery backup allows you to do. In the game, there are defaults as to what camera views, information, etc. are given to a player when you play through a round. Having the battery backup allows those settings to be saved so that if you don't want the hole-by-hole flybys shown to you every hole, you can turn them off and never have to worry about it again, even after playing another game and coming back to this one. Also, the battery backup saves tournament statistics for all the computer and human players, multiple custom human players, so that you can have avatars and individual statistics for all your friends, and most importantly, it saves your progress in tournaments, so that if you actually make the cut in the first round, but don't have time to finish the second round, you can just back out of the game and pick up right where you left off. Like the PC-based menu system, it just works, and it works well. The game features the ability to play 3 real-life courses, Sawgrass, Avenel, and PGA West Stadium, and a fantasy course called Sterling Shores, named for game developer Sterling Silver Software. Each course definitely plays differently, and looks different too, which is nice. Certain courses also feel harder than others, which gives a nice bit of challenge variation without difficulty settings. You can either play practice rounds at each of these courses, practice driving and putting at any of the 72 holes, or compete in 4-round tournaments at the courses along with 60 other PGA Tour pros, where you have to consistently make the cut to win money. You can also sim a tournament, where you don't participate, and watch the stats come in from the various rounds, but I don't really know the purpose of this, as you'll just end up further behind the pros in the statistics. You can play through the game with 4 players, even though at the time there wasn't a 4-player adapter for the Genesis. This is achieved by having players 1 and 3 share the first controller, and 2 and 4 share the second controller. Definitely a bit more elegant than just passing one controller amongst everyone. In practice rounds, you can also play against up to 3 computer opponents, but strangely you can't pick any of the pros to play against. The computer will automatically pitch you against players named Gunther, Ivan, and Jerome. Those names don't appear to belong to any of the developers, so I don't know if it's just some kind of strange inside joke or what. The fact that you can't play as or against any of the pros is really strange, especially since if you let the game go into demo mode at the start, you'll see Fuzzy Zeller swinging away, or one of the other 9 pros. I almost wonder if this feature was available in a different version of the game, just not the Genesis one, because the game's Wikipedia page mentions it erroneously. As far as the actual gameplay goes, it's solid, if not a tad hard. Let me explain. When you go to play a round, you're given the choice of 16 clubs, of which you can choose 12. The default allotment of clubs works well, but depending on how you like to play, it's nice to have some other options. When playing a practice round, you can also choose between the professional tees or the amateur tees, which will stretch the holes out a bit. Then, when it's your time to hit and you've chosen a club, you press the button once to start the strength bar, once to stop it at your desired strength level, and once to stop it on the way back to the original start point. All of this is pretty straightforward, and many golf games have used this setup over the years. You can also overswing a bit by allowing your strength bar to go beyond 100%, which can result in longer hits,
But if you do this, it's critical to nail the follow-through button tap and get exactly back to where you started. If you don't do this, you will either hook or slice your shot, and that combined with the overswinging will have you hitting the ball far, far away from your desired spot. I would only recommend overswinging to players who have really mastered the timing of the various shots, as if you keep your strength to under 100% or less, a mishit will turn to a far less damaging hook or slice, but still probably not a good situation for your golfer. Also, the reason why I said the timing of the various shots is because the strength bar will move at different speeds depending on the type of shot you're trying to hit. A drive will move much slower than a putt, and so on. So you really have to stay sharp with your timing if you want to get under par. This part of the game is the part that I view as a bit hard, as hitting your shot absolutely perfect every time is pretty difficult, even with lots of practice. And depending on the hole, all it takes is one bad shot to ruin your day. It would be nice if the game either had an easier difficulty mode, or just allowed you to be slightly less precise. Not much, mind you, as I think the difficulty level is pretty well set, but maybe just a bit less. However, having said all that, when you do hit the ball properly, it's a great feeling. There's nothing more satisfying than chipping or using an iron to hit an approach shot and getting a doink sound effect from the ball hitting the pin. On these really good approach shots, drives longer than 300 yards, and long putts that drop, the game will go into an instant replay mode, complete with a line that showcases the path the ball took. A nice reward for hitting a good shot. As you play around, there are screens that pop up that detail the current situation. Before your shot, there's a flyby of the hole with commentary from a PGA Tour pro on what to look for. Due to the way the courses are rendered, with very low-level polygon texturing, the flybys animate very slowly, almost reminiscent of hard or race driving if you've played those titles. It's not good, and you'll probably turn the flybys off pretty quickly, even though they're a nice idea in theory. There's also an overhead map that pops up, and after you drive, there will be a small pop-up that gives you the status of your ball, in the rough, on the green, in a sand trap, etc. I usually leave the map on, but turn off the ball status pop-ups. However, even if you turn off the ball status, you can always bring it up by hitting the A button. Also, when you get into a putting situation, you'll be displayed a very useful 3D map of the green, so that you can read things and figure out just how hard or soft you should putt. The graphics for the game are not great, and it definitely feels like an earlier Genesis title, even though it came out in 1991. The game really looks like it was ported directly from the 16-color VGA PC version, and the Genesis can definitely do better than that, so that's a bit of a drawback. Also, the music in the title is the usual early Electronic Arts Genesis horrible sounding synth. This is actually a big reason to turn off the pre-shot hole flybys, just so you can not be assaulted by the music before trying to concentrate on hitting the ball. The sound effects are pretty good, however, and hearing the crowd cheer, clap, and groan as you progress is pretty nice. Even when not having the best sounding graphics, the overall presentation of the game is good. From the solid menus to the hole flybys, the game feels well thought out and produced, even if it's not perfect. During tournaments, in between holes, an announcer will break into the action and pop up and give status of how the top players in the tournament are doing. And then after a screen showing your scorecard, you'll see the current scoring breakdown among all the competing golfers, so you know exactly where you stand amongst the competition. It's little stuff like this that makes the game seem so polished. All in all, I'm giving PGA Tour Golf a 3 out of 5. In reality, it's probably more like a 3.5, but the not-so-great graphics and sound really hurt it, along with just how precise you have to be to compete against the pros. I'll be interested to see in another 100 reviews or so how PGA Tour Golf 2 compares against it, and see if they were able to fix some of these issues.
And there we go, PGA Tour Golf. A very nice, fun game that I really enjoyed playing for the review, even if it's rough in certain areas. Tune in next time for another Genesis title, but one I promise is not sports related. Really, seriously this time. Sort of. And remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.